This story is called White Neighbor Calls the Police on Black Family's Barbecue until the mayor shows up, and he's the dad. Hey, before we get into today's video, I need your help. Subscribing is one of the best ways to support us. It's fast, free, and helps us continue to bring you amazing content. Your support means a lot. Thank you so much. Now let's get into the story. Sundays in the Williams household weren't just about food. They were about family. About history. About tradition. Every week, without fail, they gathered in the backyard, fired up the grill, and turned an ordinary Sunday into something special. Angela Williams had been hosting these barbecues for years. It was her way of keeping her big, loud, loving family connected. And today? Today was extra special. Because today was Derek's birthday. The perfect day, for now. At just 12 years old, Derek was the kind of kid who made people smile. The kind of boy who held doors open for strangers, offered his last bite of food to a friend, and still hugged his mom in public, even when his cousins teased him about it. And today, he was finally getting what he had been begging for all year, his own basketball hoop. The yard was full of life. His uncles were flipping perfectly seasoned ribs on the grill. His aunts sat under the shade, sipping sweet tea and gossiping about their favorite soap operas. The kids? They were running wild, playing tag, chasing bubbles, and dunking each other with water balloons. The smell of barbecue sauce and charcoal filled the air. The music, a mix of old-school R&B and classic soul, played just loud enough to keep the mood right. It was perfect. Until she showed up. The neighbor who never liked them. From across the street, Karen Morgan stood by her window, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. And ever since the Williams family moved in, she had been waiting for a reason to complain. Karen liked control. She liked order. Quiet. Respect. And the Williams family? They were too loud. Too many people. Too much laughter. They didn't fit the kind of neighborhood she wanted. She had complained before. Sent passive-aggressive notes to the HOA about excessive gatherings. Glared at Angela whenever she drove by in her shiny white BMW, watching kids play basketball in the driveway like it was a crime. And now? Now, as she watched Derek's birthday unfold, more laughter, more music, more people, her blood boiled. Karen grabbed her phone. She wouldn't call the police. Not yet. First, she'd try to handle it herself. The first warning. Angela had just placed a slice of cake on Derek's plate when a sharp, familiar voice cut through the air. "Excuse me." Conversations halted. The music lowered slightly. Angela turned toward the voice, already knowing who it was. There she stood, at the edge of the fence, Karen Morgan, dressed like she had walked out of a country club ad, her manicured fingers gripping her phone like a weapon. Angela forced a polite smile. "Yes, Karen." Karen let out a long, dramatic sigh. "I hate to be that person, but could you all keep it down? Some of us actually enjoy peace and quiet." Angela raised an eyebrow. She looked around. The music wasn't blaring. The kids weren't screaming. The loudest sound was the sizzle of ribs hitting the grill. She turned back to Karen, her smile tight, controlled. "We'll try to keep it down." Karen's fake smile widened. "Oh, I knew you'd be reasonable." And just like that, she turned on her heel and walked away, satisfied. Angela exhaled slowly, turning back to her family. "All right, y'all, let's keep it respectful." Her brother, Uncle Reggie, the fun one, leaned in, shaking his head. "This is some bull. We ain't even doing nothing." Angela gave him a look. "Not today, Reggie." Because she knew. She knew how this game worked. They had to be perfect. No mistakes. No excuses. Because the second they weren't, people like Karen would use it against them. The moment it all changed. For a little while, things stayed calm. The music stayed lower. The kids played a little softer. But you can't have a birthday party in silence. And soon, the laughter returned. Because Derek was finally opening his presents. "No way," he shouted, eyes lighting up as his uncle pulled out a brand new Spalding basketball. The kids cheered. Angela smiled. For a moment, everything was right. And then, from across the street, Karen snatched up her phone again. This time, she wasn't coming to talk. This time, she was calling the police. The call that never should have happened. 911 operator, 911, what's your emergency? Karen's voice was calm, collected. Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance. 911 operator, what kind of disturbance, ma'am? Karen peeked through her blinds, watching the Williams family laugh, eat, enjoy themselves. And it infuriated her. There's a large group of people causing a scene in my neighborhood. I feel unsafe. A pause. The operator's tone shifted slightly. Unsafe how, ma'am? Are you witnessing any criminal activity? Karen pursed her lips. I don't know them. They don't belong here. The words slipped out so easily. Like she had been waiting to say them. Another pause. The operator's voice was measured now. Ma'am, are they committing a crime? Karen smirked. I think I smelled something illegal. That was it. That was all she needed to say. The operator's voice stiffened. Officers are on their way. Karen smiled, pleased with herself. Because now, the police would handle it. And she'd finally have her quiet neighborhood back. Or so she thought. Because she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Karen's fingers tapped impatiently against the side of her phone as she waited for the dispatcher to pick up. She wasn't angry. She was righteous. This was her neighborhood. It wasn't about race, oh no, she would never say that out loud. It was about preserving the peace. The Williams family? They didn't belong here. And today? She was going to make sure they knew it. The call that set everything in motion. 911 operator, 911, what's your emergency? Karen's voice dripped with concern. Yes, I need officers dispatched immediately. There's a large group of people disturbing the peace. The operator's tone was calm, professional. 911 operator, ma'am, what exactly is happening? Karen peeked through her blinds. The Williams family was still laughing, grilling, having a good time. It made her sick. There's loud music, people all over the yard, and I feel unsafe. 911 operator, unsafe how, ma'am? Are there any weapons? Any violence? Karen hesitated. She knew she had to tread carefully. Then she went for the oldest trick in the book. I can't say for sure, but I think I smelled something illegal. A pause. Then the operator's voice stiffened slightly. 911 operator, drugs? Karen smirked. I can't be certain. But you know how these people are. Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then. 911 operator, officers are on their way. Karen exhaled slowly, satisfied. Because now, they'd learn their place. The birthday boy's biggest lesson. Back in the Williams yard, Derek was beaming as his uncle pulled out the next present. No way, he grinned, tearing open the box. Mom. Look. My own Jordan sneakers. Angela laughed, shaking her head. Boy, you're gonna outgrow those in 6 months. Still gonna be the freshest on the court, though. Derek shot back, grinning from ear to ear. The family erupted into laughter. But the laughter didn't last. Because then. Sirens. Loud. Sharp. Too close. Angela's stomach dropped. She turned her head just in time to see 2 police cruisers pulling up to the curb. Derek's smile faded instantly. The chatter died. The smell of barbecue, the warmth of the sun, it all disappeared under the weight of those flashing red and blue lights. Angela already knew. Before the officers even stepped out. Before the tension thickened like smoke. She knew exactly who had called. And exactly why. The investigation begins. The first cop out of the car, Officer Dalton, white, mid-40s, the kind of man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, adjusted his belt as he approached. His partner, Officer Reed, younger, but with the same smug confidence, followed closely behind. Dalton scanned the yard, eyes calculating. He saw black faces. He saw a grill, music, people talking and laughing. And in his mind? That was enough. We got a report of a disturbance. Angela crossed her arms. A disturbance? We're having a birthday party. Dalton didn't look convinced. Reed smirked slightly, eyes flicking to the bottles of soda and juice on the table. Looks like a big gathering. You folks drinking today? Angela's jaw tightened. She could feel it happening. The shift. The way the moment was being turned against them. Her brother, Uncle Reggie, stepped up, voice firm. Ain't nobody here doing anything illegal, officer. Reed gave a mocking chuckle. Just asking. No need to get defensive. Angela's nails dug into her palms. This wasn't a question. This was a trap. Karen makes her entrance. And then? The devil herself appeared. Karen strutted out of her house, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on her lips. Officers, thank you so much for coming. Angela's head snapped toward her. You called the police? On a child's birthday party? Karen shrugged, feigning innocence. I just had concerns. I wasn't sure what was going on over here. Angela took a step forward, fury boiling under her skin. You weren't sure? You could have walked right over and asked like a decent human being. Karen smirked. Well, I tried earlier, remember? But you people don't seem to know how to respect your neighbors. Angela's hands shook. Derek pressed against his mother's side, his big brown eyes darting between the cops and the woman who had just ruined his day. His birthday party. And suddenly, Angela felt it. The weight of every lesson she had ever tried to teach her son about being black in America. Don't talk back. Don't make sudden movements. Don't give them a reason. But she was so tired. So goddamn tired. Dalton, sensing the rising tension, cleared his throat. Ma'am, we're just here to make sure everything is in order. No need to escalate. Angela let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh, you mean like the way your friend here escalated things by calling you in the first place? Karen gasped. I will not be disrespected. Angela turned fully toward her now, voice low, steady, dangerous. You disrespected my family the moment you picked up that phone. Dalton sighed, rubbing his temple. All right, let's just. Then? Another voice cut through the air. A voice that made Karen freeze. A voice that made the officers snap to attention. I'd love to hear exactly what made you feel unsafe. Everyone turned toward the street. And there, stepping out of a sleek black SUV, was Mayor Williams. Angela's husband. Derek's father. And the most powerful man in the city. Karen's face drained of color. The officers went stiff. Because they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. And now? Justice was about to be served. The entire block froze. The only sound was the sizzling of forgotten burgers on the grill and the faint hum of a Bluetooth speaker that no one was paying attention to anymore. Mayor David Williams wasn't just any politician. He was a man who had worked his way up from nothing. The son of a factory worker and a schoolteacher, he had built a career on fighting for justice, for equality, for his people. And now? Now he was standing in the middle of his own front yard, staring at two white officers who had just turned his son's birthday into a police incident. His jaw tightened. His eyes burned. And when he spoke, his voice was lethal. I asked a question. What exactly made you feel unsafe? Karen visibly shrank. Mr. Mayor, David turned to her, his presence commanding, towering, impossible to ignore. You weren't stuttering when you called the cops, Karen. Speak up. The way he said her name, sharp, clipped, unimpressed, made her throat bob. I just thought. No. You didn't think. His voice was ice. You assumed. Karen's mouth flapped open like a fish out of water. She looked at Officer Dalton, desperate for backup. But Dalton wasn't stupid. He knew exactly who he had just crossed. And the realization had settled in his gut like a lead weight. The officers tried to backtrack. Dalton cleared his throat, adjusting his belt. Mr. Mayor, sir, we were just responding to a call. David turned his gaze on him now. Dalton felt it like a laser beam, slicing through every excuse he had been forming in his head. A call about what? Dalton hesitated. Reed, the younger officer, shifted uncomfortably. David's lips curled. No, please. I want to hear the exact words. What was the emergency that justified you pulling up to my house with your hands on your belts like you were walking into a drug bust? Dalton swallowed hard. A disturbance. David arched an eyebrow. A disturbance. His voice was pure venom now. My son's birthday party. His family celebrating him. That's the disturbance? Dalton opened his mouth, but there was no right answer. Angela, who had been holding herself together by a thread, finally snapped. Do you know what it's like? Her voice shook, but it wasn't from fear. It was from pure, unfiltered rage. The officers looked at her, startled. Angela's hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. Do you know what it's like to raise a black son in this country? To have to sit him down and tell him that no matter how polite he is, how smart, how good. She turned to Derek now, his big brown eyes wide with confusion. That the world will still see him as a threat? Derek blinked, processing. Karen shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at Angela. But Angela wasn't done. You came here with your hands on your weapons. In front of children. She turned to Dalton, her fury crackling like a live wire. Tell me, officer. If my husband wasn't the mayor, how do you think this would have ended? Dalton said nothing. Because they all knew. And that's when Derek, 12-year-old Derek, who had just wanted to eat cake and play basketball, spoke up. His voice was small, uncertain. Did I do something wrong? Angela's heart shattered. David took a slow breath, clenching his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. Then? He turned back to the officers. And when he spoke, his voice was pure steel. You have 30 seconds to get off my property. Dalton flinched. Reed, the younger officer, panicked. Sir, we were just doing our jobs. David let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Your job? Your job? His voice boomed now, shaking the air. Reed took a step back. David's hands shook with barely controlled fury. Your job is to protect this community. Not to terrorize it. Not to show up on a baseless complaint and try to intimidate a family into complying with your bullshit. Dalton opened his mouth, but David wasn't finished. Get the hell out of my yard. Dalton and Reed exchanged a quick look. Then, without another word, they turned and practically sprinted back to their cruisers. The second their doors slammed shut and the sirens disappeared into the distance. A wave of relief crashed over the Williams family. Angela let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The kids looked around, confused. The adults? They looked furious. But the worst part? Derek. He still looked scared. Like he had just learned something about the world that he wasn't supposed to know yet. David noticed. And something in him broke. His son's innocence? Gone. All because of a bitter white woman who couldn't stand seeing a black family happy. David turned to Karen, the last loose end. Her face was red, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, still trying to look like the victim. David took a slow step toward her. Karen flinched. He didn't even have to raise his voice. Pack your bags. Karen's brows furrowed. Excuse me? David leaned in slightly, his voice low, deadly. You like calling the cops on black families? Fine. But not in my city. Karen's eyes widened in horror. You can't. David just smirked. Watch me. And with that, Karen Morgan's days in this neighborhood were officially numbered. She just didn't know it yet. Karen Morgan had no idea what was coming for her. She thought she could just walk away. Thought that being white, playing the victim, and calling the cops for no reason would work out like it always did. But this time, she had messed with the wrong family. Because David Williams wasn't just any black man. He was the mayor. And now, he was about to make her regret everything. The public backlash. Karen thought she could just go back inside and pretend nothing happened. But before she could even make it up her front steps, phones started buzzing. Her own, the neighbors, the people who had been watching from their porches. News travels fast in a digital age. And when the mayor of the city curses out 2 officers in his own front yard because a racist neighbor called the cops on his kid's birthday party, that's a story people want to hear. Within minutes, social media exploded. A video, ***, recorded by Uncle Reggie, of course, ***, was already going viral. The caption? Karen calls cops on black family's barbecue, doesn't realize the dad is the mayor. LMAO. The comments? This is why people don't trust cops. No crime, just being black. Mayor Williams is a real one. No way she's getting out of this. Get this racist out of the neighborhood. We don't want her. Karen's face turned ghost white as she read the messages flooding her screen. Then, a notification popped up. A local news station had already picked up the story. And just like that, her entire life went up in flames. The fall of Karen Morgan. By the next morning, Karen's face was everywhere. The neighborhood knew. Her job knew. Hell, even her church group knew. People who had once smiled at her, waved at her in the grocery store, invited her to their fancy wine nights. Now they wouldn't even look at her. She tried to defend herself online. Karen Morgan 82, I was just concerned for my safety. I did nothing wrong. The internet? Ate her alive. You felt unsafe watching a 12-year-old eat cake? Maybe if you minded your damn business, you wouldn't be trending right now. Hope you like moving trucks, Karen. And then? The final blow. David Williams didn't just let public humiliation be her punishment. He made sure she was gone. A few calls. Some legal pressure. And suddenly, Karen's HOA was issuing her a warning notice for harassment. Then, her landlord, who loved Mayor Williams, by the way, decided to let her lease expire early. And just like that, Karen Morgan was packing her bags. Kicked out of the same neighborhood she thought she could control. The cops weren't spared either. And the cops? Oh, they thought they'd get away with it. Thought that after a slap on the wrist, they could just go back to their jobs. Nope. David wasn't finished. He went straight to the chief of police. Showed him the body cam footage. The way Officer Dalton and Reed had walked in like they were about to raid a drug house. The way they had grabbed their belts when they saw black men standing there, unarmed, just existing. The way they had asked about alcohol, about drugs, before even introducing themselves properly. The police chief wasn't stupid. He saw the story blowing up. Knew this was about to become a scandal. And he wasn't about to let these two idiots drag his whole department down. By the end of the week, Officer Dalton, fired. Officer Reed, suspended without pay, and under review. The city issued a formal statement. And for once, it wasn't the usual bullshit excuse about misunderstandings. No, this time, they called it what it was. An unacceptable abuse of power motivated by bias. Translation? Yeah, they racially profiled that man's family, and were not covering for them. David Williams? He didn't gloat. Didn't rub it in their faces. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. And finally, they got it. The moment Derek needed. A few weeks later, Derek was back in the driveway. He was still processing everything. Because yeah, his dad had fixed it. The cops were gone. Karen was gone. But that fear that had crept into his bones when those flashing lights pulled up, that was still there. David noticed. And one evening, after work, he found his son in the driveway, dribbling his new basketball, but not really playing. Just bouncing it. Thinking. David grabbed a ball of his own, tossing it between his hands. Mind if I join you? Derek shrugged. David stepped up, lined up a shot, and sank it. Then, he turned to his son. I know what you're thinking. Derek looked up, confused. David smiled. That this won't be the last time something like this happens. That being my son doesn't mean you'll never face this kind of thing again. Derek hesitated, then nodded. David sighed. You're right. It'll happen again. And again. He paused. Then, he reached out and placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. But the difference is, now you know what to do. Derek swallowed hard. What's that? David's eyes burned with something fierce. Proud. You stand your ground. You don't let them shrink you. Derek stared at his father for a long time. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. He took the ball. Lined up a shot. Swish. And just like that, Derek Williams wasn't scared anymore. He was ready. Because his father had just given him the most important birthday gift of all. His voice. His power. His fight.